1, Granville Toyota at 41st.
BCTV, our best show.
Good morning. It's the second day of Her Majesty's visit to British Columbia. The ship, the Britannia, is presently approaching and almost underneath the Lionsgate Bridge, docking at 9:30. And furthermore, the sun is shining in spots. But leapfrogging ahead of the royal party with his coverage for CTV is none other than that expert royal observer, Lloyd Robertson. Good morning, Lloyd.
Good morning, Jack.
Lloyd, what's different about this trip?
I think
You've covered many royal events in Ottawa.
Yes, going back right to 1959, as a matter of fact. What struck me yesterday about this one, Jack, is that she looked relaxed and happy. First of all, it's the end of a long tour, but more than that, I think. She looked especially happy when she was out among the people. Whenever you see them in Ottawa, she gets off the plane, she meets the dignitaries, she goes to Parliament Hill, she signs a document, she gets back on the plane, she goes to London. Yesterday, she had lots of time to talk to people, to talk to little kids, to talk to old ladies and other people, and that's when she really shines.
Did you sense a difference between her ease of the visit yesterday compared, not knocking anybody, compared to the United States?
Yes, but I think it's hard to compare it, Jack, because the weather was so bad they had to cancel half the events down there. It was almost impossible. As you know, Southern California was inundated with very bad weather. But certainly she looked much more relaxed.
Is the security as tough here as it obviously was with the helmeted baton policemen?
No, definitely not. There is a 600-foot security bubble around that ship, mind you, when it comes in. They have air cover. They have patrol boats alongside. There are 2 Canadian destroyers escorting them in, and you can't get near it. You have to stay, anybody traveling beside it has to stay 6 feet behind the bow at all times.
And was it 20 or 30 feet back the cameramen have to be if they're in the proximity?
It's about 30 feet behind, but they did allow some boats from the Victoria Yacht Club area to go out and escort them in.
Right. Question. Why was the Prime Minister not in Victoria yesterday to greet her?
Well, Jack, it's hard to say, really. We thought it was protocol that he was allowing Senator Jack Austin to have his time and Bill Bennett to have his day to greet the Queen in BC. But we checked into that. We understand that he did have heavy engagements on yesterday morning. He checked through with the Royal Tour people at the Palace, and they, of course, said, well, we understand, that's fine with us. And he came in last night, as you know.
Now I'm going to do a dirty on you. I'm going to ask you to do the commentary on the package we put together from your coverage and our coverage to bring us up to date to this morning. Starting yesterday when the Prime Minister boarded the Britannia, I believe, and that was sometime late last evening.
That was about 9:30 last night, Jack. He and the 3 boys, as a matter of fact, Michelle, Sasha, and Justin, arrived at the Royal Yacht at Victoria Harbour last night at about 9:30. And see, he's wearing the fur hat there. It wasn't that cold yesterday.
Fur hat! In British Columbia, on the coast, a fur hat.
Right. He had dinner with the Queen and then sailed overnight with them from Victoria Harbour into Vancouver. We understand that he and she get along very well together. They like one another. And so far as we know, the dinner lasted about an hour and they both left about 10:30 last night.
Here we are, earlier in the day in Victoria yesterday with Peter Pollan at Beacon Hill Park, I think it is. What was on there?
This was the symbolic lighting of the bonfires to guide the Royal Yacht Britannia out of the harbour last night on its way to Vancouver.
There we are. We'll see the bonfire, I'm quite sure. Peter Pollan and the Queen. He's the Mayor of Victoria, of course. And somebody's going to light the bonfire momentarily.
You'll see a very good bonfire here. There it is.
Quite a celebration and all, is it not, eh?
Well, there she is again, you see, in that kind of setting. She looks very relaxed, very happy, quite rested, really, considering that it's been an arduous tour.
Now we have some music up.
Right, this is the University of Victoria. We're leaping backwards in this case. This happened before they went to the Royal Yacht last night. This is one of the last events on their schedule.
And we believe we have the Victoria University Orchestra and Jazz Ensemble.
That's right.
And there we zoom in on the Queen again,
President Ian McTaggart Cowan.
of the University of Victoria. It's going to be a big deal this afternoon with the 7,000 children singing it at the BC Stadium in Vancouver. We'll give you the program later for today, however. And then we'll continue with some edited coverage of before she went to the Royal Yacht Britannia yesterday.
This is still at the University of Victoria, Jack. You know, when you consider that she yesterday covered about 7 events in Victoria, she was on the go from about 10 o'clock in the morning until very late last night, 9:30. That's a long schedule. I mean, to a lot of people, they say, well, it's just going around enjoying yourself, but it's more than that, really.
No, when you see all the people lined up and everyone has to get the greeting and the little handshake and whatnot, the strain must be quite incredible.
Well, I was on the Royal Yacht yesterday for the media reception. We had about 300 media people in there. Now, of course, you can't say what you talked about when you, as you know, when you talked to the Queen and the Duke, but they circulated and talked easily with at least 200 of those people who were on board yesterday.
Yeah, they're really quite magnificent. And some of the treatment they get from some of the press throughout the world, I'm sure at times it's some just a teensy bit, to say the least.
Well, I'm sure what surprises you and surprised me certainly was that no matter how hard some of these reporters are on the Queen, in this country or around the world, wherever she goes, they're always there for the royal receptions.
And one of the charming things was how they went crazy in Seattle and other places in the United States, the media I'm talking about. And there's the Queen now boarding the Britannia for her trip to Vancouver, which is ending momentarily. As a matter of fact, is Steve right there? Steve, are you there? Hold on a second, Steve, and I'll be with you just when we come out of this. There we go.
That's the send-off from Victoria last night with the fireworks and the people on the dock. Thousands out there yesterday to see her, Jack, and they weren't just Victorians. Pamela Wallen was telling me that she met some people there from Newfoundland.
Good crowds, even in the
Very good
rain.
crowds.
Well, the forecast is still 100% for rain, but it looks like the forecaster is going to fool us again, and we might get some shower. Now, our helicopter pilot, Steve Wright, where are you now, Steve?
Jack, we're just hovering over top of the Lionsgate Bridge, and Her Majesty's Yacht Britannia is just coming up on Brockton Point with, I estimate, around a flotilla of approximately 500 boats. Fire boats are out there. The North Vancouver Fire Department have their crane trucks spraying water, and it's very spectacular.
Okay, how many feet are you up, and are you well clear of the 600-foot security zone?
We're still at 600, right on the edge.
On the edge, eh? And how's the weather?
There's clearing. It's clear over Georgia Strait, and Victoria should get some sunshine here this afternoon.
Good, Joe. And get the film back when you're ready so we can do a package at the end of the program and keep people up to date.
Have it for you in about 30 minutes.
Thanks very much. This is what you call nearly live television. But you, of course, are doing the full coverage anyway. When are you live this afternoon with Pamela?
2 o'clock BC time, Jack. That will be the beginning of the show at the stadium. At about 2:30, the actual presentation begins. The Queen arrives with the Duke and Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Bennett, and then the big show.
Right. Now, just for the record, I want Debbie Vandergracht to give me the program for today so that people know what's happening.
She'll travel through Gastown to Cambie Street, then down Cambie to 12th, and along 12th to City Hall. There she'll be welcomed to Vancouver. She heads via 41st Avenue to UBC. She returns via 16th Avenue, and then King Edward to Queen Elizabeth for lunch at the Quarry House restaurant. Then it's to BC Place, from which we'll again have live coverage beginning at 2 in the afternoon, and to the aquarium, and then back to Pier BC and the Royal Yacht.
And His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh has a separate program for part of the day, including a speech at the Men's Canadian Club in the Hotel Vancouver and the Royal Yacht Club and some other functions, then back to the Yacht Britannia. Lloyd, why don't you stay for a couple of minutes? It's not often we have your august presence here. Last time you were on the air with me, you called me John Ferguson.
You know, Jock Ferguson,
Jock Ferguson.
Jock Ferguson. That was on the election.
I almost changed my name.
People in BC didn't hear that, I guess, because that was on the Eastern
Was
Fleet only.
that was when we were sitting on the outside waiting for the
That's
band
right.
to be lifted.
That's right.
Your turn to chat up. Our royal expert, Lloyd Robertson. One segment after the break, so call now. Listen, Lloyd, young man though you are, you've covered royalty since when?
1959, Jack.
59.
As a matter of fact, I was covering royalty for the CBC in the days when you couldn't talk about demonstrations if they were around the Queen.
What do you mean?
A CBC vice president is quoted as having said that a cement block fell within 20 feet of Princess Margaret one day, and he didn't even mention it because he was broadcasting on the air. Also, during the 1964 riots, the live coverage did not show the riots around the Queen in Quebec City. CBC News did a special on that later. Don Cameron, who is now a CBC vice president, produced that show and got called on the carpet and really taken down by the bosses because he had dared to show the riots around the Queen. But since then, of course, it's become much more natural. And you can't shield that sort of thing from people, as you know.
In other words, they used to do it kind of like the House of Commons. You only showed the speaker.
That's right.
The question asker. You didn't show any of the guffaws or the reactions around the House.
That's right. In fact, you had a Royal Tour guidebook, and you had to go by that guidebook, exactly what was supposed to be said in certain situations.
Times have changed.
They have indeed.
Not that there will be anything other to report other than enthusiasm, but it's nice to draw the comparison. Some of your fans are going to call you. They might ask you the most obtuse questions about protocol. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack, and good morning, Lloyd.
Good morning.
First of all, Lloyd, I remember sitting beside you quite often at Di Francesco's when you were getting your hair cut in Toronto.
Oh, for gosh sakes.
But
Who is
I want
this?
to welcome you to BC, and I wanted
Thank
to
you.
know what your observations as a broadcaster in Toronto have been to the plight of British Columbia with regards to the lumber problems that we've had with respect to the tariff and that, whether it gained much media coverage back there.
Now, not
or-
only a royal expert, I want you to know every intimate detail of the problems of British Columbia.
Well, I'm glad to see that you're off the hook on it, because I know that the problem was settled yesterday so far as BC is concerned.
Here. And you still get your hair cut at Di Francesco's?
Yes, I'll say hello to Joe for you. What's your name?
Pardon?
Just give me your first name.
My name is Dan. I don't know if you're still going there or not. I used to sit beside you.
Okay, you've said that.
Okay, Dan.
How much do you pay for your haircut?
Oh, I don't know. I pay him by the month. It's about $50 a month. I can go as many times as I want. Is that?
I still
That's a
get
pretty good deal. I will have you flying to Toronto to get your hair cut.
No, I have a $5. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Lloyd and Jack.
Good morning.
I'm just watching a boat go by Lumberman's Arch right now.
Good.
And I wanted to ask Lloyd, a couple of nights ago, Channel 5 had a gentleman on, and he was saying how little the Queen does. Is that an American opinion or what?
May have been his opinion, but Lloyd will tell you precisely what kind of day the Queen has on these tours.
Well, consider the events yesterday. At least 7 events, official events in Victoria, and then there was a media reception at lunchtime where they didn't even have time to sit down. They were standing up for an hour more talking to media people. 300 media people were on that yacht yesterday. And then she went to a luncheon at the Empress Hotel, and she had to talk and be animated all the time with all those people at the head table. Is that work, or is that work?
Of course it is.
Sure.
It's almost an impossible schedule.
Oh, it's very arduous.
Go
Very
ahead,
arduous.
please.
Good morning.
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 Yes, I would like to know how much a royal visit is costing us Canadians.
You'd have to ask the BC government about that. I don't think, I don't have the actual figures.
And I don't think it really matters an awful lot, to be quite honest. Go ahead, please. Where are you? Come on.
Hello.
That's you,
Hello?
ma'am.
Yes.
Hello, Mr. Webster?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'd like to welcome Lloyd to British Columbia, but I would also like to say I have two tickets that I can't use to go this afternoon, and if anybody would like to use them, if they'd like to call me, I'd be only too pleased to give them.
What do you want, 10,000 phone calls? You want the phone company complaining? Why don't you go out in the street and say, hey, I got 2 tickets. But we'll take your number just to be polite. Take the number. Go ahead from Karamios.
Welcome to British Columbia, Lloyd, from downtown Karamias. A great big hello to you.
Thank you.
Did you get to speak to the Queen or to the Duke personally? I know you're not to mention what you said, but did they speak to you and shake your hand?
Oh, yes. I talked to them yesterday on the Royal Yacht Britannia, and have talked to them at media receptions and other occasions.
Did they know exactly who you were, that you were the newscaster?
Well, I've met them a couple of times, and I saw a flicker of recognition in the Duke's eye yesterday, and I don't think the Queen really knew who I was. She was introduced to me again.
Well, I'll tell you who he is. He's Lloyd Robertson. He's the anchorman with Harvey on the CTV National News, and he covers all the special events for the network. Go ahead from Victoria. No, not Victoria. Go ahead, please.
Morning.
Morning.
Morning, gentlemen. I'd like to ask your guest, Lloyd, his opinion on the protocol of Mr. Trudeau
bringing his 3 sons with him and onto the Royal Yacht.
Mr. Trudeau and his 3 sons were invited onto the Royal Yacht by the Queen and the Prince, sir.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Mr. Robertson, the British press covers the Queen and the royal family's activities rather intensively, some might say obsessively. What do you think of the sort of coverage that we give in comparison with the coverage that's given by the British press and what the American press seems to have done during the visit to California?
Thank you, ma'am. This is a wonderful woman. I must tell you something about her. This woman lives with a telephone stuck in her ear. She has been calling me for nearly 1,000 years, and she's a very good caller. No, don't go away, you old bism. She's a very good caller, but she is on every telephone talk show everywhere. She knows the secret to get through, and she has a lovely, mellifluous voice.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Webster.
Don't overdo it, love. What was
she
her
was
question?
talking about the coverage here compared to the coverage in Britain. So far as the television and radio coverages are concerned, the coverages are very much the same here as they are over there. Much more genteel than the press, because over there it's very competitive, and gossip is the main commodity the major tabloids trade in, so far as the royal family is concerned.
I noticed
and the royal family is very concerned
I
about
noticed you had that dreadful keyhole peeper on Canada AM yesterday morning.
Nigel Dempster.
Nigel Dempster.
He's the expert on gossip.
Yeah, he's the guy who says, I don't talk to chambermaids. I only talk to royal friends.
Yes.
I didn't like him. Go ahead, please.
Lloyd?
Yes.
If you notice the red carpet and the alcove that went up through there, on a tour of the building, you'll find there's an old light bulb, and it's only turned on when a sovereign visits and those iron gates are open. I thought that was an interesting point.
Where is that?
So in the red carpet up there, you see the films, there's a big light bulb. It's about 75 years old.
Where?
At the Parliament Buildings, Victoria.
Oh, Parliament Buildings, Victoria.
And
it's
the light goes on. It's only turned on when visited by the sovereign.
You mean when those wrought iron gates at the front door are open?
Right. They open only when the sovereign goes on.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that
Where
either.
you see the light bulb is 75 years old.
Do you know how many watts there are in the bulbs that were
No
put there
idea.
at the time of the...
It's quite ancient.
They're 15-watt bulbs.
No, it looks like it's much larger.
And there are 3,300 of them on that building.
Oh, no, this is one.
This is a little royal trivia for
you.
Thank you very much. I'll look for the bulb when I go over to cover the election. What election? Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Robinson.
Robertson. My name is Ferguson. His name is Robinson. Carry on.
Yes, I would like to ask him when they report news in Toronto with Mr. Harvey Kirk. I wonder why every time when they finish and Mr. Harvey Kirk hesitate report his own name and Mr. Robertson.
Oh, yes.
Harvey would say that that's a gimmick that has worked well for him over the years and people watch for it now.
How do they do it again? How do you
He
do
says,
it again?
I'm Harvey Kirk. And then I say, I'm Lloyd Robertson for CTV News. Good night.
Okay, Q. I'm Jack Webster.
And I'm Lloyd Robertson.
And thank you very much for coming. We shall watch avidly your coverage now. Coverage today starting live at 2 o'clock at the stadium.
Right.
And I'll be back with Dave Beckman, the metric man, after the break. First, let me set the stage. The arch foe of metrication in Canada is a Conservative MP called Bill Dom. Bill Dom has been on this program 3 times, and I must say that Bill Dom gets hysterical support from many people who call the program on the problems of metrication. Now, Bill Dom is the guy who told us that he regards metrication as not legal in this country. He's the guy who wants to know why he and his parliamentary colleagues have not been charged with the illegality of selling gas by the gallon in an MP-owned service station in Ottawa. With me this morning, and I'm very glad he's here, is Mr. Beckman, David Beckman, the Executive Director of the Metric Commission of Canada. Do you feel that your metric plans and your metric actions have had fair reportage or a fair crack of the whip across the country?
I would say yes. I think that there are still some areas, Jack, where we're having some backlash, and it's being led by a few individuals who are making it a political issue.
All right, well, you can't blame them for that. But what I want to do with you this morning, before I get your positive side, I want to take you back to what Dom said and this and that, and I'd like you to tell me if he is right, wrong, in the middle, or confused. But let me ask you a question first. Is metrication now fully legal by Parliament, and are we subject to prosecution in certain times ahead if we don't do as the law says?
Absolutely. There are some areas where, in fact, it is illegal, and you can be charged if you are not trading in metric. Or, for example, if you get a speeding ticket right now, the speeding ticket is given to you for exceeding the speed limit in kilometers per hour. And many people get speeding tickets every day, and they're convicted for exceeding the speed.
All right, now I want to try and do this kind of clinically. First of all, give me the broad charge made by Bill Dom about the metric system in Canada. So let's watch Dom right now.
Parliament that was sent down there to Ottawa to represent their constituents never voted, ever, on the mandatory aspect of metric. They never agreed to prosecute people for telling someone how much hamburger was a pound. They never agreed to putting people in jail. They never agreed to deporting people because they sell by the gallon. All of these things are being done by orders in council, away from Parliament, and the issues should be decided by the elected members in Parliament. And I can give you examples of when this present government, when they were in office in 1978, and they walked into the city of Peterborough, where we were a pilot center, and I'm the member of Parliament for that area. They walked in and they put bands around weigh scales that were weighing out in imperial weight. They literally forced a retail grocer out of business without a weigh scale. They walked into a dairy. They forced a 40-year dairy to close its doors because it was selling milk in 1-gallon bottles, or 1-quart bottles, or 2-quart bottles. They said that's illegal. They forced our only cabinet maker in Peterborough to close his doors because he would only manufacture cabinets in imperial sizes. So yes, they intend to do it, and we intend to see that they are not able to do it.
Many broad charges. The basic one of that is that this man Dom sticks to the position that Parliament has not voted it, ipso facto, none of this is legal.
Well, Jack, I think if you check the records in history, first of all, in 1970, the white paper was tabled on metric conversion, supported by all parties. At that time, there was no vote because there was unanimous support by all parties. In 1977, Parliament passed the Metric Statute Amendment Act, which gave the government the authority to change 9 major pieces of legislation. One of those pieces of legislation was the Weights and Measures Act. And in that particular piece of legislation, the government was given the authority to pass by order in council dates beyond which the imperial system would not be used in 3 sectors of the economy. Those 3 sectors of the economy, incidentally, have to do with sale of gasoline by the liter now. The other sector is home furnishings. We're talking about sale of carpets and sale of fabrics. The other sector is the retail sale of products in grocery stores. And that program is occurring right now, and it's a 2-year program which we anticipate will be finished by the end of
So this was adopted and passed. The Metric Standards Amendment Act was passed in 1977 and made it clinically clear and legal.
Right. There was, in fact, close to 9 months of debate. It went through committee proceedings, and it was passed by the Senate and proclaimed into law in 1977.
When the Tories came in 1979 for the 9-month stint, did they do anything radical to the standing legislation?
They actually did 2 things. The first thing they did was they said they wanted to delay the conversion of the scales in the retail food stores by a period of 1 year so that the Metric Commission could provide more information to people. The second thing they did was they proclaimed by order in council the regulations pertaining to the sale of carpets and home furnishings. And that particular order in council was proclaimed by them in 1979 and was gazetted.
In the early years, is he correct when he says grocer forced out of business, the only cabinet maker in, where was it, Peterborough, forced out of business? Is that correct?
Jack, I doubt that very much, although I know that there was, in the early years of the program, trial conversion in 3 areas. One of the areas happened to be Kamloops in British Columbia, where they went through a trial period of conversion. One of the other areas was Peterborough. I can't be confident. I'm not sure. I wouldn't like to comment any further on that allegation.
But it is possible for a man who defies the legislation to be put out of business?
No. If you are in violation, of a regulation, you are subject, if you are convicted, to a fine, similar to a speeding ticket, I guess.
I see. Now, why have the Tory MPs in Ottawa not been charged when they set up this station specifically so you could charge them? At least so they tell me.
Well, I think that's a matter for the Department of Justice. They certainly are looking at it. There are, of course, a couple of cases right now. Charges have been laid against service station operators in Toronto for selling gasoline by the gallon. I think that, you know, we'll have to wait and see what happens in that.
Well, surely you would like to see anybody who's breaking the law, including Tory MPs, charged as they're selling gas by the gallon.
I don't think personally I would. I'm particularly interested in it. Most people are obeying the law. There's only a few people, and I'm not sure what the motives are behind the tactics that they're using.
Oh, the motives are to embarrass the government politically in case they can beat the charge and put a big black mark on metrication laws.
I think, by and large, Jack, there are 130,000 gasoline pumps in this country that are selling gasoline by the liters. People, in fact, don't buy gasoline by the liter or by the gallon. They say, we want $10 worth or fill it up. I think you could add to that right now, the price of gasoline is so high that most people are reluctant to buy it.
But have you recommended that this Ottawa gas station be charged for breaking the law?
That is not within the jurisdiction of the Metric Commission. The actual monitoring of the regulations under the Weights and Measures Act is a responsibility of the Weights and Measures inspectors who work with the Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
But when Dom goes out of the country saying, as he did, look, he even threatened an American landed immigrant of 22 or 32 years with deportation, is this part of your action?
No, absolutely not. We do not have anything to do with the enforcement of regulations. It's a matter of the Weights and Measures inspectors in the Department of Justice.
So these things can happen, but it's none of your business?
That's right.
More with Dave Beckman, Executive Director of the Metric Commission, after the break.
The sample weighs in metric.
Oh, about a half a metric. I don't know, really.
I must confess, it's kind of difficult, even after I've talked to Dom, perhaps more so after I've talked to Bill Dom, just to understand what's going on. But what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back to a positive rundown from you, is take some of Bill Dom's charges one at a time, flash them up, we'll watch them on the monitor, and you tell me if he's full of wind or what. Dom, cut number one.
On December the 31st, 1983, if some dear old soul walks into a grocery and asks the grocer how much that hamburger, which is advertised at, say, $9 a kilo, how much that hamburger is per the pound, and that grocer tells her, he is subject to prosecution and fines.
Wrong.
Wrong, okay.
Absolutely.
Totally wrong. He says...
The conversion of the retail skills program is a program which is planned by industry. It started in January of 1982. It terminates on December 31st of 1983. But anyone can go into a store and say, I want a half a pound of whatever, if some dear old lady wants to do that. And most retailers are going to accommodate them. They will, in fact, weigh out the equivalent amount in metric. It is a requirement that the retailers advertise and sell only in metric units beyond December 31st of this year. That's only in advertising and sales, but it has nothing to do with giving information.
He's quite wrong there. For if the guy weighs out half a pound and says, here's half a pound, that he could be charged in jail. Obviously, because he's weighed out the slightly less than 100...
well, 227 grams, perhaps. Is that accurate?
227 grams is a kilo.
Half a pound.
It's half a pound.
Right. 454 grams in a pound.
Next one.
But they now charge extra if you want a metric sheet of plywood or a metric sheet of drywall. And the reason for that is that with the United States staying on the standard 4x8, 16-inch centers, it has been found that that will be the volume seller. So now the lumber yards in Ontario are selling in 4x8, and I assume they're selling their sheets here in 4x8.
4x8 here, yeah.
Remember, they had metric not too long ago. Now you pay extra if you want metric.
As a matter of fact, Jack, I would have to admit that in many cases that's true. Unless you have a volume purchase of metric lumber, in particular plywood or drywall right now, you may pay a premium. Because at the present time in the construction industry, which of course is economically really depressed at this particular time, we're still using 4x8 sheets of plywood. The interesting thing, however, is that in the lumber yards right now, the thickness of plywood is all described in millimeters, and the dimensions are in fact described still as 4x8. We haven't gone to 1,200 by 2,400 millimeter sheets of plywood, except if you are involved in a major construction project and you're ordering in bulk.
Will the day come when plywood sheets will have to be 1,200 millimeters by 2,400?
At the present time, the plans of the Canadian Construction Association and UDAC, the two major people involved in construction in Canada, are saying yes. They're finding it's very expensive to carry dual inventories of material, and they're really putting a push on to clean up the construction industry in the next couple of years so that we are operating, or they are operating, only in metric.
For the American market, though, the Americans are not metricated.
No. In the construction industry, that's true. They're not metricated. But the interesting thing is, in talking to people like representatives from Weyerhaeuser, some of the big pulp and paper dealers, at the present time, if they're bidding on any kind of international contracts, they're using Canadian mills to supply the plywood because we do, in fact, supply it in metric units.
Terrible question. We've got to ask you. Is 4x8 precisely the same as 1,200 by 2,400?
No, it isn't.
Fair enough. Now, that's clear. In other words, this will come gradually, and you will not impose it to the disadvantage of any 4x8 exports in BC.
We, in fact, are not imposing anything. It's a construction industry that are making the decisions, and we are simply working with them cooperatively.
Next one, from Bill Dom.
23 representatives from these foreign-based metric companies sat on the Metric Commission. 23 votes they had that voted us into metric in the food sector. And not one of those weigh scales used in stores today was manufactured in Canada.
Now, let's get some background on that. He's talking there about weigh scales. And he says on some commission, 23 of these companies represented had a vote to go metric on weigh scales. And that not one of these weigh scales is being manufactured in Canada. True or false?
Partially true, partially false. The sector committee that he's talking about is a sector committee which consists of representatives from the retail food store industry, the major chains like Safeway, Woodward's, and so on. The people that were voting on the conversion in that sector, in fact, are Canadians. They're working with Canadian companies. Certainly Woodward's is a Canadian company. They had representatives from the Canadian Federation of Retail Grocers, the Retail Council of Canada, and so on. The people from the weigh scale companies like Toledo and so on, although they sat on the committee, sat there as resource people and did not vote on any particular decisions with respect to converting the retail food scales.
So Dom is wrong on that. The weigh scale manufacturers did not vote on it.
Now, with respect to scales, it is true. A lot of these scales are manufactured outside of Canada. A lot of them are imported from Japan. A lot of them are imported from the United States because they are, in most cases, digital electronic scales. There are not very many manufacturers of those kinds of scales in Canada.
Pity.
Yes, it is. It really is a pity.
But Toledo and Company didn't, and the others didn't have a vote.
No, they did not.
It was Canadian retail food people, including the big American subsidiaries and big Canadians like Woodward's, who said, we're willing to go, we have to go metric.
Right. It was their decision. You know, I must admit that the Commission worked with them. In fact, the retail scale conversion program had been delayed a significant period of time. But with the rest of Canada converting to metric, I think they felt that ultimately it was a good chance to change and convert to metric. The one other significant thing about it, Jack, is that when it comes to retail scales, a lot of the scales that were being used were obsolete. And at this particular time, most people were changing to digital scales anyway. And they said, well, if we're going to change to digital scales, let's get metric scales.
Sounds reasonable. More with Dave Beckman, Executive Director of the Metric Commission of Canada, after the break. But we must keep up with the royal visit and the royal visitors. And now we're going to go to our shots of the Britannia as she sails under the Lionsgate Bridge. And there's got to be a couple of hundred or more craft, large and small, surrounding the Britannia. It's the biggest little armada I have seen in English Bay, I think, in all these years, as the Royal Yacht Britannia comes in, dead on schedule, of course. This was just at about 9:15 when our helicopter guy was over there with the camera crews, and we're now going round through the park, along the seawall, and into Pier BC, where the Queen will leave the yacht with His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh and continue with another hectic day. And praise be the Lord, it doesn't look like it's raining either here or in downtown. So don't forget our live coverage later on in the morning. Yeah, you got to share a billing with Her Majesty the Queen this morning, Dave Beckman. Now, back to Metric and back to Bill Dom. But before you give me the clip, we have retail food. They are now converted.
That's right. The end of the program is December of this year. It started in January of '82.
That's right. December when?
December of 1983 is the end.
Gasoline is under the same instructions.
Well, they're under a different order in council, and that particular program occurred in approximately 1979.
Fort Cummings too. Now let's get back to a fascinating little wrinkle told to me by our mutual friend Bill Dom.
That the Metric Commission has set up $9 million this year to pay mechanics to buy that special socket.
To buy that one 15 millimeter 3/8. One 15 millimeter 3/8 inch flex head socket to get the 2 bolts out in the little tight place.
You buy that socket, send your bill into the Metric Commission, the taxpayers will pay you.
I may have misunderstood Bill Dom on that a little bit, but what he says is that $9 million has been set aside to give to mechanics if they want to replace certain specialized equipment for metric use. Is that correct?
The Metric Commission administer a special program for workers who, by reason of their particular employment, have to purchase their own tools. And if they have to purchase metric tools to replace imperial tools, the government established a program which is administered by us so they can get a rebate for the cost of the metric tools and the containers and so on. Now, I think it's only fair to say, Jack, these people have no other means of getting any kind of income tax write-off. They are people like mechanics who have to bring their tools to work. They are not self-employed, so they can't write the purchase of the tools off as an income tax deduction. And so the government said, if you have to purchase metric tools, and if they meet certain criterion, they will be eligible for reimbursement by the government.
In other words,
half the cost of the tool.
They get half the cost of the additional metric tools they have to buy as a tool of their trade.
That's right.
They give you, send you the receipt, and somebody sends them the money.
And we verify that they are indeed replacing an equivalent imperial tool, and that it's required, because of the nature of their employment, they're required to have that tool.
Yeah, well, that doesn't sound too unreasonable. Is there a big demand on this fund?
There, in fact, was a significant demand at the termination of the original program was March 31st of 1982, and there was a significant demand, and in fact the figure of $9 million is incorrect. The cleanup for that total program turned out to be $20 million, and the program has been extended another 2 years because we know there are a lot of mechanics that have not in fact taken advantage of the program.
Next, Bill Dom raises an odd one, and he's talking about the fact that somebody had to replace their whole roof because of metric measurement. Bill Dom, up you come from the past.
We had a storm, and the insurance company wanted to do a patchwork on our roof, and they told us to get some estimates, so we went ahead and got estimates, and they came back and they said, no way, no good, that's the whole roof. And so we went back to the roofer and we said, well, it's only supposed to be a patch job, and the roofer said, sorry, can't do it. We've got to do the whole thing because the old roof was done in the old measurement and the new one is in metric, and we can't just patch that job. They had to do the whole roof.
True? True, because I had to do the same thing with my chimney when it corroded out on the corner. I couldn't buy imperial-sized bricks, and I had to replace the whole chimney.
Now, that seems kind of crazy to me.
It depends, obviously, Jack, on the extent of the damage, but it's true that the shingles that you purchase right now are, in fact, metric. And if you have damage in different parts of the roof, to provide an overall repair job, it may be that you may have to purchase all metric shingles. I won't deny that. I find it unusual, though. I always thought when it came to repairing things like chimneys and so on, we're using bricks, that you just throw a little bit more mortar in the in between the bricks to match them up.
Because presumably your metric conversion puts a shingle on a brick. Are bricks metric?
Yes, bricks are metric.
It puts the brick or the shingle as close as it can to the standard old-fashioned measure.
Exactly. There's not a large difference in the sizes that you're talking about, but in fact, you know, a situation could exist where there's extensive damage to a roof in different parts of the roof where you may have to replace the whole roof.
But surely you could fake a little patch with metric shingles on, what do you call the other measurement? Imperial measurement. Imperial
Sure.
measurement.
Right.
But
I would think so.
It could happen.
Sure.
Now, floor coverings, and then we're going to have a good giggle about sports. Let's do floor coverings from Dom now.
The Order in Council, Jack, clearly states that as of January the 1st, 1981, it shall be illegal to use any form of imperial measurement when describing floor covering. It should be noted now that it is legal to use descriptions in floor covering in imperial measurement as well as metric.
Did you back down on that?
No, we didn't, Jack. In fact, it is still, at this particular point in time, illegal to advertise or to sell floor coverings or carpets where you are quoting the price per unit of measure in anything but metric. In other words, if you say it's $10 per square meter, that's what you must say. You cannot advertise or sell and say the price is $10 per square yard. That's clear in the regulation. However, this does not prevent people who are in that particular industry selling carpets or selling any kind of floor coverings to, in fact, provide additional information to people. They may say, here's a 9 by 12 carpet, the price of this is $300. But when you're quoting, to ensure that there's some uniformity, when you're quoting the actual price per unit of measure, the regulation is very clear, it must be in metric.
You can't put in the ad a 9 by 12 yard carpet.
You can say 9 by 12 yard carpet, $300, but you cannot, if you're putting it in as a price per unit of measure, you must state metric only.
In other words, $10 per square meter.
$10 a square meter.
Have you had trouble in the industry about that?
I think there's been some confusion, certainly. I think that the intent of the regulation is that to allow retailers to provide information to the consumer, to the customer, but to ensure that there's uniformity in advertising and selling of carpets. We don't want people in one store selling it at $10 a square yard and someone else selling it at $12 a square meter, because then consumers don't really know which is the best buy.
Sports caper after the break. And here is another report on the progress of the royal visit in its second day in British Columbia, and now in Vancouver. Yeah, sure. No, I need that. The Vancouver fireboat. Hundreds of little ships around. Great stuff. Now, here's the pictures I was looking for. There they are. These are the ones. Now, so the royal visit is underway. Back to Dave Beckman of, I very nearly called you Your Royal Highness. Dave Beckman of the Metric Commission. Dave, we had a great laugh with Bill Dom. We got quite hysterical about it when Bill Dom was talking about what you're allegedly trying to do to sports in this country. Cue Bill Dom.
Fields are presently being converted to metric in Canada. They have done some of them in the West, and they will be doing them all, if they have their own way, against the CFL's desire to keep imperial measurements.
So the 50-yard line becomes the 44.362-meter line.
Well, you might go to jail if you're a sportscaster and you talk about the 45-yard line.
How about golf?
Golf, they did that. They hired a professional golfer a year ago to come into Canada and tour from coast to coast. They wouldn't disclose the costs of that tour. But I can tell you this, that they made the golf courses in Canada go metric. They found that the Americans couldn't golf or couldn't use them without the imperial measurement because they didn't know which club to use. Consequently, they've gone back into Ontario and put up dual measurement on all our Ontario golf courses.
You're right. We've got metric on some of our golf courses, too. It's quite mad. It's in both measurements. And they have
That
them.
is hilarious.
They have them in Scotland, too. It's quite crazy. 140.5 meters.
Right.
Don't know what the hell to use. Now, First of all, in the CFL, I want
Right.
the honest-to-God truth on what you're doing to the measurements of football fields.
We are not doing anything to the measurements of football fields. The Canadian Amateur Football Association decided, since Canada was converting to the metric system, that they, on an experimental basis, were going to set up some metric football fields. They did that, and football, amateur football, was played on metric fields in Manitoba last year. That is their decision and what they intend to do. The CFL have said that they'll never change to metric. That's entirely up to them. There's no regulation, no government intervention in that area. It's a voluntary thing.
Give me that again. There is no metric commission
Regulation.
intervention on the measurements for
Absolutely-
sports.
Absolutely not.
It's-
We are helping some of the sports organizations who have said they want to convert to metric, so we're giving them technical information. We are, in fact, helping by providing information to the clients with whom they deal.
Well, I thought Bill was serious, I must tell you.
Well,
He's wrong.
He's wrong.
Wrong.
The Metric Commission have nothing to do with that. It is something that's done by the association.
Did you hire a pro golfer, and if so, what was the cost to make golf courses go metric?
We hired Dan Halderson. The Metric Commission hired Dan Halderson, and the intention of hiring Mr. Halderson, who is a professional Canadian golfer, was to help golfers in Canada become more accustomed to golfing in metric, to help them determine what kind of a club they should use when they are making a particular
Is there any
shot.
compulsion on metrication of golf courses?
Absolutely none.
None
It's a
whatsoever.
voluntary thing, and that's why you see some golf courses are metric, some are dual. Primarily, a lot of them are still
Has the
metric.
Canadian PGA taken an official position on this?
No, they have not, to my
Or the
knowledge.
Canadian Amateur Golf Association?
To my knowledge, they have not.
How much did Halderson cost you?
Approximately
That's our business.
$20,000.
$20,000. And there's no suggestion of metric clubs. Some idiot who doesn't play golf said metric clubs. Clubs are not in metric, you silly fool. What else? Last gasp from Bill Dom. Let's see it. Where's Billy?
They have decided now to phase out the Metric Commission.
Just a minute. You mean they're backing right off?
Well, they think that their job's done. There are 104 sectors to convert. They've converted 30, and some of those only partially, but the decision has been made, and the executive director, Dave Beckman, of the Metric Commission advised his employees that they're being phased out, and all final reports are to be in by the end of February.
Are you phasing yourself out with job done?
Jack, at the present time, we're working on a plan for the ultimate phase-out of the Commission. Metric conversion in Canada can't go on forever, let's face it. At the present time, Mr. Dom was right in that statement saying that there are 30 sectors that have finished their work and have disbanded because they said, we've converted everything in our particular sector of the economy. It is metric. There's no point of us continuing to meet. We anticipate that a year from now, there will be approximately another 30 sectors who will have finished their work and will have stood down. So we're working on some logical program for the phase-out of the Commission in the future. Of course, the phase-out will be a recommendation to the government. The government will obviously have to take a decision on this. But metric conversion in Canada has to end at some point in time. It's costing the taxpayers money. The sooner we finish up the program, the better.
When you say 30 sectors have been completed and another 30 will be completed, you hope, soon, out of 104, that means that your officials have laid down the standards and the regulations for the metric conversion of those sectors.
No, we work with the sectors. A sector committee consists of representatives from business and industry. These people meet together and they plan and implement a conversion program. We provide technical assistance to them. We provide resources in terms of executive secretarial assistance and that kind of thing. We don't implement the conversion. It's business and industry that do.
And after you've folded your tents, your metric tents, and gone away, somebody else will be responsible for the enforcement of, for instance, MPs who break the law by selling gasoline.
Sure, that's been the case for years, Jack. Under the Weights and Measures Act, there have been inspectors going around checking for compliance with regulations, and that's been going on for years.
Okay, Dave Beckman will sum up, and he'll take your calls too after the break. So Dave Beckman obviously does not give the arch enemy Bill Dom a passing grade in the information he gives us about metrication. If I can just try one roundup question. It's a law, it's properly approved, it's legal. Deadlines have been set for certain industries such as retail food by December 31st, 1983.
Right.
When will we see a schedule of deadlines for all the other sectors?
There is at the present time, Jack, a schedule of completion dates which has been determined by the other sectors. Some of those, and that's related to the earlier comment I made about 30 sectors having finished their work. We anticipate, based on the information from 30 more sectors, that they'll be finished their work within a year. We anticipate, again, that there will be some sectors that will be a long time in converting because they're tied to international conventions and international regulations. The air traffic business, for example, airlines, they're talking about 1990. So I think there will be a few sectors that will take a long time, but I think ultimately we'll see the predominant use of metric in Canada within 3 years.
Is Europe metric all the way?
Generally, yes. In England, and that's a question that's raised many times, what happened in England? They backed off the whole program. The answer is that they converted their coinage to decimal coinage, and the industry, in many cases, are converted to metric. They backed off of the program as it pertained to the public. In other words, they are still selling gasoline by the gallon. They're still selling meat by the pound and so on, and they have not completed that conversion. The one interesting thing, however, is that the European Economic Community have set 1989 as the deadline for complete conversion within the European Economic Community, where all trade must be in metric units.
And obviously the Canadian government did not consider, and you probably agree, that voluntarism could have done the job.
It can to a point, Jack, but the Australian experience was that there are certain sectors of the economy where you need regulation. They have always been regulated before. We're simply now regulating using a different system of units.
Okie dokie. I've come up against one problem myself which drives me crazy in automobile parts. You've got the British standard BSA, is it?
Yes, there are several standards. I think that at this particular point, that's why we're trying, the world are moving to the SI system, because you have a lot of different standards. The international system is the metric system to which we all intend to move. Standards is a slightly different issue, though, because standards for automobile parts, nuts and that sort of thing, are different in different countries.
You're very tricky. Okay. You're ready to start all over again?
Sure.
Are you ready to be attacked?
Absolutely.
As a dictatorial whatever. Go ahead, please.
Hello? Could I ask you a few questions?
Yes, please.
What was wrong with Imperial?
Hold on, ma'am. What was wrong with Imperial? I'm not taking that question. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
There's one question I'd like to say, gentlemen. You know, Jack, I listen to your program all the time, and if I miss you in the morning, I catch you at night on Channel 6.
Good, get the point.
But there's one question. When you had Mr. Trudeau on your program, he stated to you that he would guarantee that any major decision concerning the Canadian public would be put to a vote to the Canadian people, and I never seen a vote on capital punishment or metric.
Capital punishment is not affected by the metric. I can't remember the Prime Minister saying any such thing, that every issue would go to a vote, and I'm quite sure off the top of my head that he said no such thing, because he wouldn't. Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. It was my understanding when this metric came in that it would simplify packaging and make price comparisons much easier. I'm looking at a popular brand of coffee sold in BC right now. It's sold in 369-gram packages. It's 36.9% of a kilo, and so I figured it must be something to do with ounces. And you check it out in ounces, it works out to 13.016 ounces. Now, it's my way of thinking that they're just trying to rip us off here by putting a different kind of packaging, and then they come after us. So it looks like a pound. It looks like a pound container, but it's short of a pound.
In responding to that, Jack, you will find a lot of packages which are metric now, but they are in what we call funny numbers. And the intent of industry ultimately is to get rational numbers so that we won't have 369-gram packages. We'll talk about 250 grams or 500-gram packages or 400 milliliters of something in a can. That whole process is going to take quite a while, but the Canadian Consumers Association, or the Consumers Association of Canada, rather, are very actively raising this issue with people who are in fact packaging goods
I
in
presume
Canada.
that the excuse will be that they've got to use up these old pound cans. But as this guy points out, it's not a pound can.
No,
it's 13.016 ounces. 306.
And it must be intentional too. It must be intentional too, because like they never sold anything in 13.016 ounce packages.
Yeah,
that's right. It's a marketing
con.
strategy. A marketing strategy by a company.
You call it a marketing strategy. I'll call it a con.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. A very good point indeed. Go ahead from Victoria.
Good morning.
Morning.
My biggest complaint is I don't like metric. I don't think I ever will, but the confusion with the older people is just awful. And, you know, after you've had Imperial for 80 years, and then this is stuck on you, and I feel like I'm a foreigner in my own country.
Are you 80?
No, I sure am. Not far from it, but but I feel like a foreigner in my own country.
That's
But, I mean, what's more is this idiots running our country going to change?
I don't know. Thank you. She's right, of course.
It is difficult.
traumatic.
It is for older people. There's no doubt about it, Jack. And the one thing that I guess that we in the Commission have been trying to do is provide them with information and try to alleviate their concerns. Although metric is a very technical language, there aren't that many units that one needs to know. You have to know something about Celsius, kilometers, kilograms, and some of those, you know, those sort of basic units that you're going to have to deal with on an everyday basis. But psychologically, I was brought up with the imperial system, and I remember sitting in school memorizing all kinds of
How many rods in a chain?
I haven't got a clue anymore.
How many bushels in a peck?
Yeah. That's
How many centimeters in a meter?
How many centimeters in a meter?
Yeah.
100.
After the break. Dave Beckman is Executive Director of the Harried Metric Commission. Do you feel harried?
No.
You
never.
don't feel harried?
No.
Go ahead from Kelowna.
Yes, good morning, Jack. Good morning, Mr. Beckman. Mr. Beckman, you have invaded my right as a Canadian citizen by dictating to me that I must use metric. You are using my tax dollars for this conversion. You have upped the price of my food, my materials, and, sir, I disagree with you totally. I do not think that it is the right of a commission to take in its hand and power the right of the Canadians and say, you are going metric. To me, you sound like nothing but a dictatorship commission. Thank you.
Thank you. No, she means
Thank
that.
you.
She's not joking.
It's very emotional, but let's put one thing straight. It is not the Metric Commission that are, I mean, I pointed out earlier, Jack, this was debated in Parliament, and there was a metric statute amendment law passed. And prior to that, in 1970, all parties agreed that we should, in the long-term interests of Canada, convert to the metric system. Now,
is there a valid complaint that you've rushed it?
Well, it's difficult to say. Again, we're working with industry, and industry are trying to develop the timing so that costs are minimal to either the industry or the consumer. And I guess I pointed out earlier that if we continue on with a metric commission and conversion for several more years, it's going to cost us even more money.
Your budget's what, $9 million a year, your own budget?
Right, approximately 9.
How many employees, civil servants?
We have 100 people at the present time.
Can they all count?
I think so. They all have five fingers on each hand.
Go ahead, please.
Hello.
That's you, sir.
This government has tied this country into such a dictatorial knot that we'll never be able to untie it. The entire North America is built on 4x8 standards, 16-inch center standards, and if you try to rebuild or remodel something with metric, it'll never fit. By the time you get your paneling across the wall, you're going to be nailing into no studs. When you come to metric tools, I've got a set of metric tools, I've got a set of imperial tools, but the metric tools fit on a 1/4 inch, a 3/8 inch, and a 1/2 inch ratchet. Are we going to now have a third set that have metric ratchets?
The answer to that is no. You will find on the market right now that there's a wide variety of tools. I might ask, why did you buy the metric tools to begin with?
Because I had to fix my Volkswagen car that needed metric. But if I try to add to that later on, I'm not going to be able to. Because I'm going to have a metric tool fitting on a metric ratchet instead of a metric tool fitting on an imperial ratchet.
And I like this caller's point about the fact that he's redoing his basement with 4x8s and can only eventually buy 1,200 by 2,400 Millimeters, meters, centimeters.
Yeah, at the present time, you won't have any problem. We, in fact, put out, the Metric Commission put out a booklet to help people who are, in fact, renovating or doing some repairs in their house. Typically, the only thing that's required, it may require an extra stud every so often, Jack, to, in fact, do a repair.
Can't add a stud after the building is built.
You can put in a nailing surface.
Yes.
Even I can do that, but I sympathize with you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Jack.
Yes.
Yeah, seeing how the government has taken it upon themselves to go to metric, what steps are they making to educate the people that have learned on the standard system?
You got to pick it up as you go.
What steps are we taking?
Yeah.
I guess I could say that all the provinces, when they realized Canada was moving to the metric system, have been educating students for years now. And for adults, we are putting out a lot of information, some of which is distributed through regular mailings to people, some of which is available from the Commission, some of which is available in each of the provinces, because each province has a metric information center.
Do they teach the inches, feet, and whatnot in the schools nowadays?
No, they typically are teaching metric only. It's far simpler, and it saves a lot of teaching time.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I wanted to ask, I grew up with a metric system. Now, in construction, why do you eliminate the centimeter? Why do you go in everything in millimeters? I think that's a little bit ridiculous here. Go with 1,000 millimeters. Why not a meter or 100 centimeter?
Jack, that decision in Canada was made by the Construction Association. It was not a commission decision. In the evolution of the metric system, in Europe, they in fact do use centimeters for a lot of measurement, but in fact, in Canada, it was decided by industry that we would use millimeters, and after all, it's a matter of moving the decimal place 1 point anyway, so I think that they felt it wasn't that different.
There's 100 milliliters and millimeters in 1 centimeter.
100 millimeters are 10 centimeters.
Yes.
10 centimeters.
Right.
So there's 10 millimeters.
You move the decimal place 1 point, so 1,200 by 2,400 millimeter sheet of plywood could have been described by 120 by 240 centimeters.
Nomenclature.
Nomenclature, exactly.
Nomenclature?
Right.
Nomenclature.
Well, nomenclature, I say.
Nomenclature. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
An issue that affects every Canadian. Why is it we can't let the Canadians decide if we want it or not want it? Why do we have to let the politicians that don't do any building, don't do any repairs, decide for us?
Even I've got to answer that question. Canadians decide it. If Parliament decides tomorrow that we've all got to become women and women have to become men, that's their decision. The only thing they... No, I won't finish that story. Parliament has absolutely total power in terms of the laws, and technically speaking, we control Parliament, and we have our remedy, which is to throw the rascals out.
Yeah.
That's our only hope. My thanks to Dave Beckman, Executive Director of the Metric Commission. I'll add up the score later on, Dom. But I want to see you charge him for his gas by the gallon.
Well, it won't be us that charge him, Jack, but we'll certainly watch the case with interest. I'll be watching it myself.
If and when he is charged.
Right.
My thanks to Dave Beckman. I'll be back
Thanks
to
very
wrap
much.
up with a free-for-all and maybe a little royal coverage after the break. The Queen and His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh, of course, continuing their tour in Vancouver. And as a matter of fact, they've already are now receiving their official welcome at Vancouver City Hall. And after that, they go on to University of British Columbia for the Museum of Anthropology visit. And we'll have some film very shortly, I think, to bring us up to date prior to our live coverage on BCTV and the network this afternoon. Any calls? I'm just doing a free-for-all at the moment. Any calls? Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to mention one thing with this last, with the metric.
Yes, yes.
I live in Surrey, and we have a rapist on the loose, right? There's a rapist and a child molester. You know the description we get of the guy?
No.
173 centimeters tall and weighs 66 kilos. How am I supposed to know how big this guy is?
You raise a very valid point, but I'm sure that's a case where the RCMP would also have given the...
Well, this is published in the Vancouver Sun. That's the description of the fella.
60, how many kilos?
173 centimeters tall and weighs 66 kilos. Now, isn't that something for somebody to go around looking for a guy that big?
66 by 2.2. 2612. He's about 150 pounds, and I don't know how tall he is.
Neither do I.
173 centimeters. Somebody help me. Help me. The general consensus of opinion here is that Mr. Beckman's left that it's 5'10".
Yeah, isn't that ridiculous, though?
Yeah, well, I'd blame the Vancouver Sun or any other reporter who used the centimeters in that case for doing it.
Yep, and that's published in Vancouver Sun last night.
For the moment, you've got to do it in feet and inches. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Jack.
Yes.
Oh, well, since everything is not, in the metric system is not carved in stone, why not just change the dimensions of the metric system? I mean, I'm a cabinet maker, and the metric system is very unwieldy.
It's just a question of getting used to it. I have no doubt down the line. Who knows about rods, perches, chains?
We don't use those very often.
Furlongs. Used to use them when I was a kid, way back in the middle of the last century.
Yes, but those are not used very much.
Tell
but
me.
If we just went and changed it, then like a rose is a rose, and just change the dimensions of it.
Okay, I'm fed up with the subject. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I want to get my 5 pence worth in. Why are all these people jumping up and down about metric? What do they think their currency is anyway? I mean, it's decimal currency, isn't it? How would you like to go back to pounds, shillings, and pence, Jack? I certainly wouldn't.
I'd never go back to pounds, shilling, and pence. Pounds. How about putting on...
Pounds, shillings, and pence.
How about 19 and 11 farthings? Go ahead, please.
I'd like to tell you about the politics of metrics hundreds of years ago. The Fahrenheit was a German living in Poland.
The who was?
Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
Joseph Fahrenheit. Knew him well.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Fahrenheit.
Yes. He was living in Poland, but he was a German. And Poland nor Germany ever used his ridiculous scale, which was inaccurate to start with. And the only reason why the British took his scale for measuring temperature...
Why was it?
...was because French were promoting Celsius. And they wouldn't take anything from French no matter how good it was.
They didn't want Pierre Celsius. They preferred Joseph Frank Fahrenheit.
I didn't hear you.
Yes, I know. Well, I preferred Charlie centimeter myself. No.
Well,
Thanks very much, Soph. Thanks very much. Why can't I get off this topic? Go ahead, please.
Jack, I suggest that the metrication of Canada is just another metrication in Canada. Is just another step in the Francoization of Canada.
Oh, I think you're putting...
And I see our sleazy Prime Minister has got another free night's lodging. Good. See you, Jack.
No. The Prime Minister was invited by Her Majesty the Queen with his children to go on the boat, and there's no need on this day of all days to make such tasteless, stupid remarks. Mind you, this is a chance I take when I take telephone calls. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to know why Canada is the only country in the world that issues their sea charts in metric and not fathoms. As far as I know, for hundreds of years it's been in fathoms since charts began, I guess, but Canada is issuing for the past 2 years their charts in meters.
You mean so many meters deep?
That's right.
What's wrong with fathoms?
I don't know. I guess maybe you can ask the Metric Commission. But for the last 2 years, they've been issued in meters.
Keep talking like this and I'll be supporting metric. We've got to come to something uniform. Where am I? Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, good morning. I just wondered how people are accepting the fact that they're spending millions of dollars on metric commission investigations, and when they can't even provide people who got this formaldehyde in their house, who probably got it via a similar type of commission. I don't see how the government can justify all the money that it's giving away to different countries and how it's putting turmoil into the marketplace, and they can't take care of their own citizens. And I don't appreciate this guest of yours' tongue-in-cheek attitude about the price of gasoline, because it's the cost of fuel and energy that's bringing this whole economic system right now.
Well, we can't blame Beckman for the national energy policy. For goodness sake, take a break, and I'll come back and wrap it up after the break. Go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I'd like to know which is correct. I've been listening to radio broadcasts and yourself as regards the Royal Yacht. I've heard it called HMS Royal Yacht and HMY Britannia.
I have in front of me the official briefing for the press, and it is, said he with absolute total authority, HMY Britannia.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Her Majesty's Yacht Britannia. Next one. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack.
That's you, sir, yeah.
Yes, Mal Corey from White Rock calling. I just thought it was kind of nice to think about Ponce de Leon and the Fountain of Youth when I was looking at Lloyd Robertson. He and I worked together in 55, 56 in Winnipeg. Other than a little bit of gray hair, he hasn't changed a great deal over the years.
How old is Lloyd?
Lloyd right now, he was about 20...
How old is Lloyd?
Lloyd?
Now.
I was just trying to figure it out. 26 and 23. He must be about 49 years old.
You're dead on the button. I asked him this morning. He looks about 35 and he's 49. He leads a hectic life and a tough schedule, and I don't know how he does it. Now, then again,
I agree.
Then again, who would believe I'm just verging on being an old age pensioner? I look no more than 40, 45 at the most.
Jack, you'll live forever.
Well, some people hope so and some people don't. Thanks very much. I'll tell Lloyd you called and gave his age on the air. Let's have a look. Let's have a look to finish with some of these lovely pictures of the Britannia arriving this morning with Her Majesty on board.